Welcome to the Social Podcast, where no discussion or debate is off limits.
Hey everybody, happy hump day. Wonderful to have you with us. We've got a lot to get to today, so welcome to the conversation. Let's get it started.
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about this. Should you need a vaccine passport to go to a restaurant or a concert or travel to other parts of Canada? Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said yesterday, Tuesday, it was up to provinces to decide whether proof of immunization should be required within their borders. So the question we're asking, should vaccine passports be federally mandated? And we already have our audience members chiming in on social media, including from Nicole on Facebook, who says, the vaccine doesn't mean you can't catch or transmit COVID, making the passport useless. What do you think?
Oh, that's an interesting perspective. Ali on Twitter has a different perspective. She says, you may have the right to not vaccinate, but I also have the right to make an informed choice about where I bring my family. If I can't be sure, I'm not risking my children who can't be vaccinated yet. And Ali, I hear you. I think every single parent is thinking about the implications of this, especially come September. Right now, as far as I know, there's no requirement that teachers or caregivers have to be vaccinated in order to look after kids. And this is an ongoing concern. But I have to say, I mean, a part of me, even though I like this idea, when you do start doing a bit of a deep dive, it kind of falls a little bit apart. Do you know what I mean? Let me give you one example. I'll give you one example, which is that, because this is provincial, and so, let's say, for example, Manitoba, which I believe has vaccine passports right now, or it looks like it's going to. Let's say they have a massive outbreak, and a whole bunch of Manitobans come over to another province like Ontario that has no vaccine passport. Are you going to then run the risk of anybody who is a vulnerable citizen having a huge uptick? That's yet one example of maybe a problem that hasn't been thought out very well.
Cynthia, I'm trying to wrap my head around that, and I'm also trying to wrap my head around the fact that Trudeau wants to work with the provinces to create an internationally accepted proof of vaccination for international travel. Yet he's leaving the details to each provincial government. That's not going to end well. Do you know what I mean?
I think that's for their domestic, for example, businesses, theaters, concerts, going into retail. I think that's what he was talking about provinces domestically within their own borders, creating their own. I think that was my understanding anyway.
So that's separate from the international thing.
I have questions about enforcement that my mind went to sort of movie theaters, an example. First of all, I think movie theaters in many provinces are starting to open up, and there are no vaccine passports in, for example, Ontario. But let's just say we were to implement one. You've had a lag of time where there has been no requirement. Suddenly, if there's a shift, that's going to cause confusion. And then the poor, minimum wage teenage workers there, how are they going to be responsible for enforcing this? We've heard horrible stories out of the U.S. of young workers trying to enforce masks to devastating consequences at times. So that also, you can't put that kind of weight on a minimum wage, young worker.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Those are getting down to the brass tacks of it, and that's true. I don't know how enforcement will work. Generally speaking, I think for the greater good, I can see a lot of the benefits of both an interprovincial or interprovincial vaccine passport as well as the international one. We've seen that it can be used as a tool, not so much just to gain access to things that we all love and enjoy about quote unquote normal life, which is access to restaurants, going to the mall, going to a concert, but it's also used as a public health strategy or tool. Right now, Ontario doesn't seem to be interested in using a vaccine passport, but the reasoning is interesting because our top medical doctors are saying, because we actually have a really, so far, pretty good uptake with the first and second doses. But if we hit a plateau, then what's going to happen? What happens if we have a potential fourth wave in September? Then it gets interesting. Look what's happening in France right now. Emmanuel Macron, the president, listen, they've plateaued out in France for a long time with vaccines. All of a sudden, he says Monday night, we are going to have a vaccine passport if you want to go into your favorite restaurant, your bar, et cetera, et cetera. They had record signups, 1.2 million French people, all of a sudden who were maybe vaccine hesitant, maybe didn't want it, signed up. So it was used as a public health strategy to get that vaccination level up. And with whom? the under 35 set were the number ones to sign up. Those are especially the people who are under vaccinated, who the Delta variant loves to infect. And guess what? That doesn't help just the under 35s. It helps all people the higher everybody has vaccination. So I'm all for it.
I get it. The passport seems almost like to operate as a convenience. The idea that it will be convenient to have one if you're traveling and you don't want to quarantine when you get home. That's like a perk. It's almost like a carrot at the end of this really ugly stick. You know, governments, the world has been telling us to get vaccinated. You know, that's sort of like the cherry on top of the end. Like, look, you get some really great conveniences. But on the flip side, there are a lot of people who are concerned sort of about privacy and personal freedom issues. And I have to admit, I get that. I get that particularly for our Indigenous peoples who may not want to give our government a single piece of personal information, who may not trust our health care. But at the same time, and I'm speaking about my own privilege here, is that when I hear about this passport, it doesn't scream surveillance state for me. Like the idea of the government knowing that I've had 2 doses, or a maitre d' knowing that I have 2 doses. The maitre d' has my visa, you know, like, so I don't care.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, also, it's interesting to think about the motivation factor. Mel, you were just talking about this idea that the passports as a public health strategy. I was listening to something recently. It was a podcast, and they were talking about vaccine strategies. And one of the strategies that is apparently a very good one for just human psychology is the example of scarcity. So in a place like the U.S., for example, where they are very well aware that they have a surplus of vaccines, if that government, or if the government was to say something like, you have until the end of October to get your vaccine, otherwise we're offloading our surplus to a country that is more in need. And actually, that would probably be a very good idea. Apparently, psychologically, most people will then be more motivated to get it because they feel like it's going to disappear. Yeah. The window is going to close. So that might be another strategy.
I hear you. Ethically, I don't think they can do it, but I totally understand that.
I have, and like you, Cynthia, I have questions about enforcement. And, you know, my mind goes to my teenage days when we tried to get into the club and some of us had fake IDs. So how do they enforce like a fraudulent vaccine passport situation? Like right now, what I consider to be my vaccine passport is this thing that like the province emailed to me after my second shot that has my name and like the shot that I got and on what date. But you just hit print on your printer and it's like a regular piece of paper with like, you can easily recreate that. So I don't know, like with digital printing these days, I don't think it's that hard to create a fake passport. And I don't know how that's going to work either.
I don't think it's going to be easy. I get what you're saying because P.S. I might have tried that to get into the club when I was 16. So it's possible. But I think back then what we didn't have was this digital aspect to it, which does bring up the point that you brought up, Jess, which is hacking. Everyone who's getting vaccinated, you are in your provincial database. All your information is there. So it's about creating a digital passport, perhaps more so than like old school paper or a card, although that might be a possibility too.
That's also assuming that everyone has access to like a smartphone to carry around, which not everyone does.
To go back to Cynthia's movie example then, so is someone making minimum wage holding a scanner and scanning your card? And is that like, does that like delay the process of everything? Number one, like imagine at a concert or whatever. So you scan your ticket plus you have to scan your passport. And number two, do I want the restaurant or the movie theater somehow having access? Like it's one thing for the government to have access to my medical records, but I don't know, do I want my favorite Italian restaurant to have access to my medical records? I'm not sure.
Again, like, that's something that doesn't bother me.
But then does that mean that you get to go where everybody else goes who is willing to prove that they're vaccinated if you could potentially be sick? Like there's a bigger question beyond you. That's what public health is all about. Okay, we're going to leave it right there, guys.
Yep.
We'll leave that right there. You know why? Because we must go on to the next topic. It is really, really different. There's someone who's looking for advice, and they wrote to Miss Manners wanting to know what to do about what she calls her hollering husband. So what does this mean? He starts conversations, she says, by yelling to her from other parts of the house, right? So that means she has to stop whatever she's doing. He insists that she goes to him to have this conversation. What's the advice that you want to give to this woman who clearly has a problem with her husband yelling at her from different parts of the house to have a combo?
I have a similar problem. Like my husband, Jacek, is the conversation, the person who starts a conversation when I'm in mid-walk. So we'll be like sitting down watching a TV show or whatever. He won't initiate the whole time. Then when I get up and say, I'm going to take a shower, and I'm halfway up the stairs, he'll be like, oh, so my mom called, and guess what she said? I'm halfway up the stairs. So my technique...
It's that scarcity. It's the scarcity thing. It's like, it's the same examples I gave before. You're disappearing, so he wants you.
I don't understand. So I do have a trick, like a tip.
So it's
for this
control?
person. I don't know what it is. Like he's a little spacey to begin with, so maybe that's it. But what I do is sorry, he's a little spacey. So what I do is I adopt the presidential approach where I do not stop and return to him. I say, walk with me. And I make him walk and talk. So I will walk all the way upstairs. I will go into my dressing room. I will do my thing. He will have to keep up the conversation while I have not broken a step in my actions. Walk with me is a really great tool.
Love this. This is the best bit of advice. But I think if we want to lay blame, can't we all just blame our mothers? Like my mother does this, Simon's mother does this. Simon and I both do it to each other. There's a great scene in a movie, an Albert Brooks movie. Debbie Reynolds plays the mother, and the movie's called Mother. And it's like it's become a trope. Like he's leaving the room, and she starts, oh, anyway. And then Sally said to me, and then he's like, what? Mother, I think it just all comes back to moms.
That's true.
Very Freudian.
So true. I'm guilty of that, I think, now with Marquesa, because I feel like my mom did that with me. There was a commercial. I can't remember the product. Do you guys remember it? And it was like for a phone commercial, and there was a guy, and I think he was like a spy, and like mom would call exactly the worst time. It was kind of similar that moms have a knack, whether you're walking out of the room and they see you or they don't, or they're going to call you. It's like the timing thing. And I think it's a control thing. Or maybe they're just lonely and they want to talk to you.
Well, that's what I thought, too, is that this guy, I was like, he's either a control freak or he really just wants his wife's attention. And maybe he's going deaf. It could be any of those things, which is why he's so loud. But Jason hates the holler. It is so hard. But our fix has been that we text each other. If we are in, because we have one of those narrow...
Hot tips here.
If I'm up on the 3rd floor and he's in the basement, that is a long way. And he's often in the basement. So I'm not going down there every single time. I need my steps, but I don't want them that way.
How about this?
Walk with me. I love both
the
of these.
walkie-talkie. You guys know that I use this with Marquesa. So this one's an LOL, so it doesn't have to be LOL. But this way, instead of going, Marquesa, it's, do you copy? Over. Go clean your room.
I could make that a thing in my relationship.
That could be fun. Could be a whole thing.
I'm going to turn up the temperature and ask you all, how important is sex in your relationship? Because that new Netflix show, Sex Life, about a young married mom fantasizing about her sexy single days, has a lot of people talking. So what do you think?
Well, Jess, before we get into your first question, let's talk about this show, because I had a group chat. Someone was saying, you got to watch this show. I found this show basically unwatchable and cringeworthy at moments. But I will say, it's basically like a kind of cheesy softcore porn. And I think the reason is, it's really interesting to unpack why it has become so popular. And I think part of the reason is because it taps into this like kind of nostalgia that we all have. And I mean this in a twofold way. On one hand, we have nostalgia for our pre-pandemic lives, which means that we miss touch, we miss interacting with people. And then there's also the piece of nostalgia where after a year and a half of, if you're a parent and you've been living with your partner and you're just on top of each other, we're also, I think, a lot of us in long-term relationships longing for, and the main character in this talks about this, that kind of freedom piece. And I think that's interesting to unpack. And I think it's, in one sense, it's positive to see a woman sort of in this kind of a narrative where she's sexually unsatisfied. We normally see that with men in long-term relationships. So that's one positive. Lainey, you've watched this show.
Well, I have watched it. I found it really bad and really amazing. And I'm happy to live in a universe where both can be true. I think that one of the other reasons why it's so popular is because it's content made specifically for straight cis women. And even though it's bad and the acting is terrible and the writing is terrible, I mean, there are lots of things made for straight cis men that are terrible and badly written. And so to me, I'm like, amazing entertainment, give me more of this content. That said, the other reason why I'll defend this show is because I do think in many ways it's educational. Cynthia, you as the professor, I want you to give me a report card on what I'm about to say next, because something happens in episode 5, which a concept is introduced in episode 5, which millions and millions of people around the world were Googling. 3 words: coital alignment technique. Coital alignment technique. There you go, Cynthia. So what it is it's a technique that is practiced during heterosexual intercourse, during which you align these sexual areas of the man and the woman to make sure that pleasure is increased specifically for the female genitalia, not for the male genitalia, but specifically for the female genitalia. Millions of people Googled coital alignment technique. No offense to you, Cynthia, but more people wanted to know about CAT from this show than what you wrote about in your book. I mean, I love you, and your book is amazing. Go get it.
I don't have the access that Netflix does either, but anyway.
That's the thing. But
so,
that's the thing.
Can we talk about, I haven't watched the show, so, on top?
So it is, well, I mean, I will back out here and let the expert sex educator Cynthia take over on CAT.
I say buy a copy of my book and I can tell you all about it in there, because I think we want to get to this question of like, what is sex? How is sex in your life right now?
That's what we started off. About CAT, okay, actually.
Fine. So CAT is about aligning the pelvises together. I think the man the penis owner is usually on top because it makes it easier. It could be in the reverse, but it makes it easier for the pelvises. Basically, what you need for the clitoris owner is to be able to grind against the man. So there's a particular angle that you want to be at in order to align your pelvises in a way that maximizes clitoral stimulation.
Yeah, it's daytime TV. I think our producers are sweating under the collar a little.
This is all very technical.
Back off. Yeah, well, no, I get it. Could be kids watching, but hey, we're gonna back off of that for just a second. Although I appreciate the hands, Cynthia, I really did. Let's talk about, first of all, let's go to social media. So Sharon on Facebook writes to us, sex is an important brick in the house of marriage, but it is not a foundational one. There are many other needs that need to be met in a marriage or relationship, and there is more than one way to be intimate, which is a great way to look at it. And I think that depends on the phase of your relationship. And it sounds like in the show that she's long married, which many of us here, all of us here are in long-term relationships. But for me, it also was the phase. It made me think about, the nostalgia, like you guys were saying, about the early days and dating, because I will, admit that sex was not something for me that was to show like only that, we're in love and we're connected. It was also sometimes a tool or a shorthand when to connection and bonding. When I felt most vulnerable and insecure in a relationship, it was like the shorthand of, I know how to quickly fix this. We're not communicating well, but man, we can communicate well in the sack. But of course, that's empty if you don't have the other pieces as well. But I find that a lot with human functions. I'll admit, I would not eat the best when my relationships in the past were in a really dysfunctional phase. I couldn't sleep well. There's a lot of human functions that get affected and get used for different reasons when things are not good in a relationship. So I agree. It's not just the marker of a good relationship. Maybe just vanilla, occasional sex is great too.
Yeah. I CAT all the time, but on my own time. You know what I mean? I just need a hard surface. But when it comes to sex, I'm just not very interested in CATing with someone else. You know what I mean? And so I don't even feel bad about it right now. Actually, I do feel a little bit bad about it. And yes, I actually feel bad about it all the time. And I don't even want to take the time to unpack why I don't want to. I think it's moving. It's my mom broke her hip. It's I can't shut off my brain long enough. I think I think, to do it or to desire it.
Episode 5, Jess. Episode 5 or 3. There's something else that happens in episode 3, 5. Anyway, there are several maybe helpers in this show that might stimulate the drive.
I just say, Jess, I think so many people can relate to you, and maybe this will help you feel better, is that there's been studies that have shown, first of all, quantity of sex does not determine relationship satisfaction. Quality of sex does. I think that that's probably pretty obvious. But they did this one study that might be of interest to you where they actually got couples who were generally happy to increase the amount of sex that they were having, and then it led to less relationship satisfaction. So focus on moments. There's not one set amount, so don't feel badly. Enjoy your life. We're going to move on now because we're going to cool things off a bit. Here's a question. How would you feel about a nice big bowl of macaroni and cheese ice cream? The people behind it call it the ultimate comfort food. Would you try this, or is this like an aberration? Aberration? Anyway, a sin against something.
I mean, at the outset, you just might be like, whoa, but I would at least try it. You know, like generally I'm a fan of mac and cheese, and generally the savory sweet thing works for me. I think it works for a lot of people. There's a lot of flavors that come together in the sweet and savory realm that do end up working that you don't think would. I remember, I think it was last year. Do you guys remember this? That there was a ketchup and mayo combo that was released in an ice cream. And initially I was like, oh, gross. But no, don't knock until you try it. I tried it. Guys, it was really good and interesting flavors. So I'm down for this. I don't want to say an outright no, because there are far more eclectic flavors that have been put together in ice cream that people end up really enjoying.
When this stuff comes out, though, guys, don't you wish you could be like a fly on the wall in the boardroom when they're spitballing ideas? You know, like, Jim, hear me out. August is around the corner. You know what I think about with August? I think about beef stew. I also think about apple pie. You see where I'm going? Beef stew, apple pie, ice cream. You're welcome. It's like, what? It's like,
these
don't
two
you
things,
wanna?
I don't know. I don't know who dreamed it up, but I'll tell you, it wasn't a child, which was my initial thought. And so I asked Jaya. These are basically his two favorite foods, mac and cheese and ice cream. And I said, what do you think about this idea? And he said, ew, that sounds disgusting. So if you can't get an 8-year-old on board, I don't know what adult. Maybe they're under the influence of something. You know when that happens?
Oh, yeah. Or maybe they're not targeting kids, right?
I don't know.
I feel like I'm with you, Amel. I would try it. I just don't, like, you know what, because I like cheese puffs with ice cream. I love cheese puffs. I love ice cream, the texture together, the flavor together. It's nice and savory and creamy at the same time. I just am not convinced with the macaroni. I feel like the macaroni would be really weird with the cream. That's my problem.
There's no crunch. There's no crunch in the cooked pot, assuming it's cooked.
Yeah, but I am the kind of person that likes to jam flavors together, for sure.
Got that. Okay, so we're going to stick with food. We're going to move over to the drink variety. There's a huge Twitter debate that is unfolding right now. Is the Kool-Aid Man the jar or the liquid, as you can see here? And the obvious answer, ladies and gentlemen, is the Kool-Aid Man is the jar.
Why is that obvious?
Because liquid is constantly in motion. His face couldn't stay intact if he was the liquid. His face would be going like this.
But then why would his name
the jar?
But why would his name be Kool-Aid Man and not just Jar Man? You need the Kool-Aid to be a Kool-Aid Man.
True, but you always need a container.
Well, yeah, we need containers
just call it Container
too,
Man or Jar Man. Like
every living thing needs a
defining characteristic. Is the defining characteristic this man the jar or the Kool-Aid?
Yeah, but that's not how they market it.
I mean, what's the defining characteristic of this man?
So I believe that there's a commercial somewhere, maybe in the earliest days of Kool-Aid, where the jar, because we know that that's the Kool-Aid Man, it's one and the same, is actually pouring his own powder in his head and his own water. So he's the jar.
So he
needs the powder to actually come into his identity.
Both.
He's just a jar without his true identity, which is Kool-Aid.
Or he's just a powder without a container.
That is his identification, is the Kool-Aid.
Let's leave it with Tony on Facebook. Stuff. Tony agrees with me both. The picture is the body and skin. The liquid is his blood. And insides.
Soul.
Yeah.
His
complicated being.
His soul. His heart and soul is the Kool-Aid. Therefore, it's the liquid.
I just want to know why he was always bursting
everywhere.
through fences and walls. Anyway, he had an aggression problem.
We have solved the world's problems clearly here. No, we haven't, but we appreciate you being here nonetheless.
Subscribe to the Social Podcast so you don't miss a fiery debate. Until next time, socialites.